Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from London. I'm Laura Makin-Isherwood and these are the top stories of the hour. Russian President Vladimir Putin warns of an adequate response to Western aggression, blaming it for a rise in tensions in Europe. Putin says the West has incorrectly assessed the outcome of the Cold War. Iran fires ballistic and cruise missiles during war games in the Gulf amid heightened tensions with the United States and Israel over possible Israeli plans to target Iranian nuclear sites. Faced with a surging Omicron variant, the US will distribute 500 million free COVID-19 tests and also may mobilise the military medical personnel if needed. Israel's parliament approves a ban on citizens travelling to and from the US, adding it to a list of more than 50 countries declared off-limits in an effort to contain the Omicron variant of COVID-19. Former US President Donald Trump sues New York's Attorney General in a bid to stop a civil probe into his business dealings. America is staring at a bleak holiday season as the new Omicron variant has upended lives with its aggressive transmission. It's accounted for 73.2% of new cases over the past week. Hospitals are getting busy, testing centres are witnessing long queues, and sports and entertainment events are being cancelled. America's top pandemic advisor, Dr. Anthony Fauci, has warned of a bleak winter ahead. The Omicron strain has raised alarm because of its number of mutations, more than prior variants had. Early data suggests it could be more infectious and possibly have higher resistance to vaccines, but Dr. Fauci believes the variant is unlikely to be more severe.
The world has been shocked by the appearance of a variant that is even more transmissible than the very troublesome Delta variant. First isolated in southern Africa, it is now dominating in Africa, has taken over in England, and right now, as I speak to you, in the United States, more and more of the isolates that are being identified and sequenced are of Omicron.
At this moment of urgency, the President of the United States will address the nation to lay out his plans to tackle rising infection rates during the upcoming festive season. Ahead of his address, the White House has released a detailed action plan to curb the Omicron spread, building on the winter strategy outlined earlier this month. President Biden aims to ramp up the supply of rapid tests by distributing 500 million free COVID-19 test kits, increasing support to hospitals and deploying military personnel across the country, as well as expanding vaccination capacity. President Biden is expected to reassure Americans that the administration is prepared for rising case levels, and he'll issue a stark warning to unvaccinated individuals. The White House has already ruled out any plans of a lockdown, though, or tougher restrictions in this upcoming speech.
This is not a speech about locking the country down. This is a speech outlining and being direct and clear with the American people about the benefits of being vaccinated, the steps we're going to take to increase access and to increase testing, and the risks posed to unvaccinated individuals.
Well, our correspondent Susan Taurani is joining us live from New York now. Susan, just how quickly is the Omicron variant spreading across the United States?
Very quickly, it has become the dominant variant, perhaps faster than any variant that we have known. The headline came in as a shock, perhaps faster than expected yesterday, and the president will be speaking about that today. And while it is more transmissible, doctors and scientists are saying that the symptoms are milder here in New York. There are testing sites across the city, and despite the number of testing sites, long lines circling around blocks, individuals waiting for hours at a time, and retailers reporting that they're really running out of at-home test kits or running very low, really signifying that perhaps people saying that either themselves or anyone that they know has COVID right now, whether or not it's this new variant or not, but it just signifies that how rapidly it's really spreading.
Well, Susan, here in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson hasn't made any moves to impose a lockdown over Christmas, just yet at least. And President Biden sounds like he won't be doing that either. So what's the reasoning behind that?
So, what's interesting is his mandates until now has dropped his poll numbers very low on the one hand. On the other hand, states have the authority to impose mandates on their own here in the United States. So governors and mayors can impose lockdowns. This morning, there were some murmurs about what to do about schools here in New York. There has been a number of shutdowns in New York City, from Broadway shows to Christmas spectaculars, or even some restaurants. And businesses themselves have taken upon themselves to be safe than sorry. So states have the authority here in the United States to impose those lockdowns on their own, and whether or not they decide to do that or not is yet to be seen. Again, when President Biden, every time he does impose mandates like that, they haven't been so popular. So I don't know whether or not it's political or not, but I think that at this point it might really have a backlash if he goes ahead and does that, when governors and mayors have the authority to do that if they deem necessary.
Susan Taurani in New York, thank you very much. Well, COVID-19 infections have broken records in parts of Europe, leaving governments scrambling to bolster defences against the fast-spreading Omicron variant there. The World Health Organization has called for nations to redouble efforts to help end the pandemic. Here are the details.
As a fresh wave of COVID-19 washes across Europe, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said on Monday, if needed, he would tighten curbs to slow the spread of the Omicron variant.
The situation is extremely difficult, and the arguments either way are very, very finely balanced, because we've got cases of Omicron surging across the country now. We've got hospitalizations rising quite steeply in London. Johnson's comments came as Omicron infections are quickly multiplying across Europe, prompting an aggressive response. The Netherlands went into shutdown Saturday, closing all but essential stores, restaurants, and other public places until at least January 14th. Germany plans to limit private gatherings from December 28th to a maximum of 10 people who have been vaccinated or recovered from COVID-19, according to a draft of proposed steps. Ireland on Friday ordered bars and restaurants to close at 8 p.m. and reduced the capacity in all public events. Italy is also considering new measures. The World Health Organization warned Omicron should not be underestimated.
There is now consistent evidence that Omicron is spreading significantly faster than the Delta variant. And it's more likely that people who have been vaccinated or have recovered from COVID-19 could be infected or reinfected.
In the U.S., a spike in COVID cases is also alarming public health officials who see the Omicron variant fast becoming dominant. On Monday, the White House said the federal government had dispatched 30 ambulances across New York State to help with surging cases, and an indoor mask mandate was reinstated in Washington, D.C. On Tuesday, U.S. President Joe Biden will address the nation about the variant and plans to control what's expected to be a coming wave of cases.
Well, global markets are also reacting to the new scare of the Omicron variant, with investors weighing up the extent of the impact this variant could create on the global economy. An appetite for risks has staged a comeback. Here's a report on how Wall Street in America has responded.
Global stocks and oil prices fell more than 3% early Monday. That as investors feared the return of restrictions due to a surge in cases of the Omicron variant. The fast spread of the coronavirus variant saw the Netherlands go into lockdown on Sunday, with pressure now on other countries to follow over Christmas and New Year. German leaders are also due to meet Tuesday to decide on whether to introduce tougher contact restrictions. The Pan-European Stock 600 was down just over 2%, falling to its lowest level in more than 2 weeks. Investors were also spooked by comments from a United States senator on Sunday. Democrat Joe Manchin said he would not support President Joe Biden's $1.75 trillion domestic investment bill. That saw Goldman Sachs cut its US real GDP forecast for the first quarter of next year to 2%, down from a previous 3%. Markets outside Europe and the US were also hit by fears of new restrictions. MSCI's index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan and emerging market stocks slid to their lowest in a year. Japan's Nikkei dropped just over 2%. Oil prices also swung lower due to concerns that the variant would hurt demand for fuel and signs of improving supply. Brent was down more than 3% to around $71 a barrel. New restrictions have clouded the outlook for economic growth and also risk keeping inflation elevated.
Tensions are simmering at the Ukrainian border, and Russian President Vladimir Putin has blamed the West for the shift. Speaking to senior military officials in Moscow, Vladimir Putin has once again warned the West that there will be an adequate response to any kind of Western aggression, hinting that Russia will develop its army further. A hotline between Washington, D.C. and Moscow has been activated after Moscow presented a wish list of security proposals to the US last week. Those guarantees, the Kremlin said, would be in exchange for de-escalating tensions at the Ukraine border. One of the demands include NATO giving up on military activity in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. The US has rejected some of Russia's proposals as unacceptable, but says it's ready to engage in diplomacy through multiple channels, including bilateral engagement.
We have been clear as the United States, and just yesterday the 30 nations of the NATO alliance were clear in a statement that came out of the North Atlantic Council. We're prepared for dialogue with Russia. We've had dialogue with Russia on European security issues for the last 20 years. We had it with the Soviet Union for decades before that. That has sometimes produced progress, sometimes produced deadlock, but we are fundamentally prepared for dialogue. Russia has now put on the table its concerns with American and NATO activities. We're going to put on the table our concern with Russian activities that we believe harm our interests and values. That's the basis of reciprocity upon which you would pursue any kind of dialogue.
While Moscow is yet to receive any concrete answer from Washington, the US response is likely to shape Moscow's next steps over Ukraine. Amid the ongoing back and forth, the Russian Defense Ministry released a video showing what it said was the first video of an unmanned aerial vehicle called Orion hitting an aerial target. The ministry claims Orion hit a helicopter cheap drone on a military training ground in Crimea during tests. Orion can also conduct remote reconnaissance for dozens of hours. On the other side of the border, Ukraine held its first presidential trilateral meeting with Poland and Lithuania. President Zelensky reiterated Ukraine's wish to become a member of NATO, while Poland and Lithuania expressed support for preemptive measures against Russia.
Повинні бути потужні, превентивні речі, потужні, серйозні санкції, щоб навіть не було жодної думки щодо ескалації.
Отже, хочу сказати, що політика наша дуже активна в цьому напрямку, і я глибоко вірю, що ми зможемо в результаті реалізації цієї політики побудувати сильну безпекову платформу для того, щоб захистити не лише держави НАТО, але й Україну від будь-яких дій, будь-якої російської агресії. Я хочу ще раз підтвердити, я вірю, що
The former American President Donald Trump is back on Fox News, and this time he's called Chinese President Xi Jinping a killer, but said that he does not support the diplomatic boycott of the Winter Olympics. In the interview, Trump said that he had a great relationship with the Chinese president while he was in office, and then made the rather bizarre claim saying, and I'm quoting here, "He's a killer, but I had a great relationship with him." Trump has often spoken on China and its president in the past. In January 2020, while celebrating a trade deal with China, Trump said that it was terrific working with President Xi, as he is a man who truly loves his country, he said. On the flip side, Trump also claimed that China has been economically ripping the US off for many years. He also commented on the ongoing US diplomatic boycott of the Winter Olympics to be held in China next year, saying that it hurts the athletes and makes the country look like sore losers. The Biden administration announced the diplomatic boycott in response to reports of China's human rights abuses in the Xinjiang region. While the move still allows US athletes to participate in the Games, no government officials will attend. Well, the former US president has also filed a lawsuit against the New York Attorney General. Letitia James has been served with a lawsuit over her investigation into the business affairs of Donald Trump, which the former Republican leader claims is politically motivated. In the lawsuit, first accessed by the New York Times, Trump has accused the Attorney General of seeing him as a political opponent. It also cites a list of incidents where Letitia has criticised the former president in the past. Responding to the accusation, the Democrat Attorney General said that the suit would not deter her probe. She said the investigation will continue and no one is above the law, not even someone with the name Trump, she says. Ms. James is probing whether the Trump organisation may have illegally reported false values on its properties, potentially to gain banking and tax advantages. Trump's lawsuit comes after earlier reports suggested the Republican would have to testify before Letitia James. Trump's son and executive vice president of the Trump Organization, Eric, had to testify on the issue in October. The former president is facing pressure from several legal probes. The Trump Organization is also under investigation by the Manhattan District Attorney for possible financial crimes and insurance fraud. In July, the Trump Organization and its long-serving finance chief came under trial with felony and tax evasion charges. That trial will begin in mid-2022. Trump is battling to prevent years of his tax returns from being released to prosecutors. Trump is also vying to block a congressional probe into the US Capitol riots. The probe wants to access to the White House records when Trump was in office. China wants the upcoming Beijing Olympics to be a one-of-a-kind event, saying it aims to run the Games on clean energy. For this, it's been building large solar parks, but there are concerns about what might be going on behind the scenes.
Farmers in China's Hubei province have been living in poverty. But a year ago, their situation was much better. They had a steady income until they were forced to give up their land for solar farms. They say that they received little compensation from the firm which is building the facility.
When using all this land, is it within their rights? The company tells us they are a legal enterprise. Of course they are a legal enterprise, otherwise the country wouldn't give them a license to operate. But how about us farmers? Aren't we legal citizens too, part of the People's Republic of China?
Several farmers in the region have a similar story to tell. Hebei province is one of the venues of the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympic Games. China has vowed that global sporting event will be run entirely on wind and solar energy. The plan is ambitious and it's the ordinary people who are paying the price. They've been caught in a web of land grabbers, corporations and corrupt government officials. Locals say they were beaten up by the police and even jailed for resisting forced evictions.
After we entered the court, they called us in a group, pointing at our heads, telling us don't say anything or you'll be jailed. When telling us to sign a document, we should at least be able to see the content, but they said sign it or you'll be jailed.
The regional government prides itself in spearheading the renewable energy revolution. Activists say that on paper everything looks fine. Authorities promised a compensation and say that villagers who forego their land will receive free electricity from the solar power plant. But firms have been taking advantage of loopholes in the regulations. They list farmland as wasteland in order to avoid paying the amounts due.
They told us this was unusable land, but actually it's all very good agricultural land used by farmers. They said they'd give us 3,000 yuan for an acre of land, but in the end we got nothing. The money they told us we can get from selling our excess electricity, they haven't given us anything.
Amid calls for climate action, China, like many countries across the world, increased investments in clean energy. But blatant disregard for rights mean that poorer sections of the society are unlikely to benefit from the initiative. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
And finally, NASA's Hubble telescope now has an heir, the James Webb Space Telescope. It's named after a space trailblazer of the 60s and is set to take flight on Christmas Eve in collaboration with the European and Canadian space agencies. That's all from me for now, but we'll leave you with this report.
The successor of the Hubble Space Telescope. It is the most powerful astronomical observatory. At a budget of $10 billion, it is also the most expensive. But most importantly, it is finally about to take flight. It is the James Webb Space Telescope. And it might just give us a glimpse into the creation of the cosmos. With its infrared eyes that are equipped to glare down black holes, forge the galaxy for alien worlds, and detect possible signs of life.
So the James Webb Space Telescope is NASA's next flagship space telescope. It is a collaboration between NASA and the European and Canadian space agencies. It will address a wide range of scientific topics, but first and foremost, it will detect the first galaxies in the universe, and it will characterize the atmospheres of exoplanets around other stars.
With an aim to explore exoplanets, the James Webb is a 7-ton space telescope, with its sunshade the size of a tennis court. That had to be folded like a paper crane to fit the nose cone of the European Ariane rocket that will lift off from the French Guiana. The James Webb will have to undertake the daunting task of unfurling while the spacecraft is darting towards its perch 1.6 million kilometers away.
This sun shield is quite remarkable. It deploys, as I said, about the size of a tennis court. There's 5 distinct layers, and on the sun-facing side of the bottom layer, the temperature is about 250 degrees, and on the telescope-facing side of the top layer, you've deflected so much of the light that the temperature is minus 375 degrees, or only 36 degrees above absolute zero. And that keeps the telescope, the instruments, and everything about it cold so it can detect these faint signals from distant space.
It is a much more complex design compared to the Hubble, with much more ambitious objectives, and there is always the possibility of things going wrong, as has happened before in the test runs. It will take Webb a full month to reach its intended parking spot beyond the moon, post which it would take 5 months for instrument checks before it can finally get to work by the end of June. The telescope will be supervised by the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore, one that also operates the Hubble. Bureau Report WION World is One.
There are many other...